Okay, so a lot of the changes in the architecture of the timeline enable us to have multiple views that were before only available in the timeline or in the batch views. So if we kind of look at our standard player here, we've got our triptych viewer, which we always had. Now, these are now accessible in timeline effects modules, so if we put an action onto this particular clip and we go into the action editor, you'll be able to see that we actually can maintain the triptych view inside of here. Very nice. The other thing as well is that most of the timeline modules now are also 1, 2, 3 and 4 viewport compatible layout, just as you would have had inside of batch. While we're actually in this effect, another thing to draw your attention is that we included some more options on how you view ranges inside of the timeline effects modules. So down the options drop down, we can view it as a segment range, we can view the actual media range so we can see the extended heads and tails, or we can actually see the range which this particular segment occupies in the timeline whilst we're in a timeline effects editor. Transition presets also benefit from some updates because of the architectural change. We select the transition here, go to our wipes and dissolves. You can see that we now have things like action presets. So we're going to choose something like a left right conceal. Come through, play that back. You can see we get a nice white conceal there as well. While we're looking at that as well, with the change in the pipeline to 16-bit floating point, this also gives us access to things like Matchbox and the timelines and effects, but also Matchbox transitions. So if we come into Matchbox transitions, we're going to exit that straight away. That will give us access to the presets. And once again, we can load these up, and all these will be GPU accelerated as well. So if we do like a dots reveal, this is going to look really nice. We play that through. There we go. You can see that we can have nice GPU accelerated Matchbox transitions within the timeline. While we're talking about changes to the actual processing of the timeline, if we have a quick look at our actual effects menu, with the change to the rendering engine being unified with what we're using inside of batch, which is Flame Reactor 2.0, this also unleashes pretty much any of the batch effects we choose to expose onto the timeline. So here we've picked out the ones that make the most sense for doing sort of general day-to-day timeline compositing. But you're going to notice some additions of things like action, was a timeline effect that came in, G-mask, G-mask tracer, color management, etc. So this is also a benefit of having a unified render engine between batch and the timeline environment. The comp node is something else that came in as a benefit of the change of the architecture to the timeline. So before, if you want to do transparency or blending effects onto a segment, you had to load up an axis effect. Now what happened in this sort of single pipeline approach that we have here in the timeline, at the end of each segment's processing tree, if you like, is a comp node which can be either on or off. It's off by default. If you switch the comp node on, then you have access to things like transparency changes and also blending, as well as things like pre-multiplication. Now, another thing that the comp node does is it looks for any kind of matte or masking that exists in the pipeline up to that point. So here we've got a G-mask tracer. If we kind of turn that on, you can see that the comp node will now take into account any kind of matte or mask that has been applied upstream from the comp node. And then you also have all the usual things inside of there where you can go through into the comp node. You can change the pre-multiplication, the blend, invert the matte, etc., etc., or turn it off. So once again, this also keeps it in parity with the comp node that exists inside of batch and batch effects as well. In fact, it's the same module as we said before, just exposed at a timeline level. So staying on the subject of compositing in the timeline, sometimes you like to have the comp node automatically kind of switch on. So what we mean by that is if we load up an action effect onto here and we go into the action module and we just drag out a little G-mask ellipse and just draw a mask around there, you can see that what's happening initially is that we are just cutting out against black. And then when we come out of the action module, if we turn on the comp, it will then composite that with the background. Now, 9 times out of 10, you probably want the action to composite with the layer underneath. So if we remove all that, we go into our preferences. In the timeline effects, batch effects, there's a nice little preference, use action background. I'm going to turn that on, and we're going to repeat that process again. I'm going to add an action, go into my action, add a G-mask ellipse for a second, and just kind of just draw that out and kind of invert that. And you can see now what it's actually doing is it's using the background as a source to composite on through the action timeline effect, even though composite or the comp node is not actually turned on. So that's a useful one to know. timeline effects, batch effects, timeline action, use background will automatically enable you to use the layer underneath rather than keep turning on the comp node. Another little cheeky timeline effect is when you're working with gaps. So gaps, you can apply things like timeline effects, but also in the gap menu now you've got the opportunity to change that gap into an actual coloured source. So once again, you can choose whatever colours you kind of want. We're going to pick a blue here and replace that through. And then using a combination of that with the comp node, you can do things like washes and transparency and other bits and pieces like that, which is quite nice. If we turn that up to make it a solid colour again and just kind of select our gap, you've also got the opportunity to add a matte to that as well. So you could go up, we could pick another piece of footage. So we're going to pick this parrot for argument's sake, and we're going to use that as a matte to cut through inside of here as well. So lots of things that you can do with coloured sources now as a gap effect on the timeline. Even more useful things in the timeline is the addition of the LUT, or the new colour management node, that we can apply to either a segment or a gap inside the timeline. So if we put the colour management node here onto a gap, a couple of things. We're going to be looking at the enhancements to the actual quick menus in here. But in the colour management, we've got all the options for the new colour management, the connected colour, which are the top 4 here. Plus all the legacy stuff underneath with Photomap and 3D LUT, etc. But on the default, we can then quickly go through, we can browse for LUTs and transforms if we wanted to. And if we go into 3D LUT, that's automatically going to take us to our directory for our 3D transforms, which are the Lustre Color 3D LUTs. Now sometimes these are really useful because we can actually add a slightly filmic look or a particular LUT that you may create. So if we choose one of the ISO ones, we're going to look at some Fuji stocks. We're going to choose this one for a particular moment, and you can see now if we toggle that on and off, we've now got this sort of very filmic LUT look on top of all this. Now what's good is that once again we can use a combination of the comp node to either blend or percentage this back as we choose, and because this is a gap, it's going to be going across everything that's in our scene. So it's a nice way of quickly applying looks to either a whole timeline or to segments. Let's turn our comp node off for a second, and actually if we go a little bit more into the color management node as well, there's been some enhancements as well. So presets now contain all your standard sort of like transforms to work in a scene linear environment, from log, from video, backwards and forwards. So this is nice quick access down here. And of course, once again, if we actually go into the editor mode for this, then we get the full blown module that we can then kind of use. So we'll look at the connected color stuff a little bit later on in a separate section. But if you're familiar with the LUT editor from before, then you're going to see all your usual favorites that you would expect here. Your traditional lin to log, log to lin, and your gamma displays where you can go through and start making different adjustments. Don't forget also that when you've played around and making an adjustment, because this is quite a creative as well as a technical tool, you could go then and create that lookup table and export it and reuse it in other timelines and sequences. So that's the addition of the color management node into the timeline. So over the course of releases, a lot of work has been done on the timeline, especially to facilitate easier manipulation of multiple clips at once, so multi-trim and things like that. The way this works is that if we select a region of shots that we'd like to trim simultaneously, we're going to go into a trim mode, and if we control click on the head or the tail of another clip, and when we start trimming that, we will in fact multi-trim all those other clips at once. And we control click on the head of that, you can see that it does the same there. This works in ripple and obviously non-ripple mode. So if we come here and we start to trim the head of this, obviously all the heads trim, but we're going to be rippling that throughout the timeline. Also, don't forget that we can also do things like multiple slips as well. So once again, select a range that you want to work with, being the slip tool in ripple, and once again we can go through and we can slip. Ripple's not going to make a lot of difference in this particular case, but if we certainly did something like slide, and we have multiple shots selected, then we'd be basically trimming the tail of this particular shot, and the rest of the timeline will be rippling accordingly. So once again, multi-trim, a nice enhancement into the timeline. Match options also got a lot of refinement and a lot of love over the releases as well. So what we're going to look at here are 4 clips. We've got a clip here. Let's go to our full play. We've got another clip there. We've got a clip with an effect on it, and we've got a clip or a segment that has a BFX on it with multiple sources inside. Now the match options now enable us to match out all of these segments in various ways. So if we just go and have a quick look at the match options in the drop down, you can see that by default use sequence info is switched on. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn that off immediately, so everything is deselected. You obviously got the option to match and match everything out in a timeline, but we're going to see with everything switched off what actually happens when we do a match. What you've got to remember on this is I've actually got all the sources in a reel or somewhere in the workspace in this particular project. So if I do a match for this, what will happen is it will go back and look for wherever that source exists in the workspace, highlight it, it's going to show me the sources reel, and if I actually highlight that particular clip, if I actually go to the source tab for this, you can see that we just actually referenced or matched out the original source, everything's unrolled, no ins and outs. Alright. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go and hide that sources reel, and we're going to turn back on the default on the match, which is use sequence info. And use sequence info will actually take this particular source and match it out as it exists in the timeline onto the desktop. So we're going to do match out again. We're going to pick a location for it to go. If we look at the source of this now, you can see that what's happened is that we've matched the source out again, but now we've used the information in the sequence, in this particular case the ins and out points, as a reference into that matched out source. Another thing that sequence info will also do is if we make any kind of change to this clip, so if we actually rename it, and we're going to call it Bob again, Bob, rename that clip, and we go through and now match that back out here, our new source will be matched out with ins and outs as before, but obviously with the new name that we've given it. The other options that we've got, if we go to this clip for a second and we turn on match preserve handles and we match this clip out now to the desktop, is we get something slightly different. If we come and look at the view for the source again, we've got the clip matched out from the timeline, but in this particular case the heads are rolled in. So this is actually the segment length that exists in the timeline sequence. The heads and tails are still available, but they're rolled into the clip. This particular shot, as you can see, we've got an effect on. So we also have the opportunity then, if we come down to here and we change our match options to include timeline effects, is that when we do let's get rid of this. When we do a match now of this particular clip, it will match out that particular source with the timeline effect included as well. Finally, if we come to this clip, which was our batch effect option, and we go down to the match options, we're going to turn off include timeline effects, but we will include nested content. Remember we had 4 clips inside of this. When we now do a match out to a reel, what's going to happen is that we're going to have all those clips. Bring that back to the head frame on each one. So effectively we're matching out not only the BFX in this particular case, so this is the segment with the BFX on, but we're also matching out all the individual sources that are contained within that BFX, basically the nested content. So with all these options now, it's a lot easier to match out in exactly the way you want any content and media from the timeline onto the desktop, or in fact find where that original source lives within the project workspace. There are 2 new options in the timeline now to rename your shots, and both of them are using tokens. So if we come into a particular segment and we do the drop down, you can see that we've got rename and rename shot, and with comment wedged in between. There's also some hotkeys as well. You can actually just hit N over a clip now and it will bring up the rename dialog box as it would do on a clip in the reels. So you can see here what we can do is we can completely obliterate that name. In this particular case we're going to call it Dave and rename that shot, and that shot is now renamed as Dave. But other options that you also have inside of both rename and rename shot is to tokenize this as well. So there's a bunch of preset tokens that you can use if you want to know a particular track name or record frame or track or source name or source version ID. These are all things that we can have attached as a token to this, and you're going to see tokens throughout the application pretty much from now on. The other option that we actually do have as well is that we have the option to rename the shot, and the dialog box looks very similar to this. So once again, if we call this something like FX underscore and we start tokenizing this, we can actually start adding tokens inside of here as a dynamic entity. So if we took something like the background index, it's going to look at the position of the segment in the timeline and rename it FX. This is the variable, it's shot 24 as it exists in the timeline, underscore comp. Now what this will do when we actually commit this is that it keeps all the original clip name and tape name, etc., but it adds this metadata in brackets, in parentheses afterwards. So this is kind of like user definable metadata. What's also good about this is that if we came through and we actually selected the entire timeline, get rid of audio for a second, and we right clicked on any of these clips and went to rename shot and did exactly the same thing again. So it's going to be FX. We're going to do background index for this one, underscore comp. We can now actually go through and bulk rename based on these tokens the whole timeline. So you can see here that it goes through systematically, and this is shot 23, shot 24, shot 25, etc., etc. Using the background index token, which is quite interesting, is that it will then make an association with anything that exists above the particular shot. So you can see here that this is FX shot 24 on this particular track as a background, but the layer above it, which is effectively our green screen parrot that we want to comp, although it keeps its original clip name and tape name, it also labels this the same as the shot underneath. So it says there's a relationship between this particular segment on a track to the segment below. And this, as we will see a bit later on, comes in very handy when we start wanting to generate automatically batch groups on the desktop. We can actually use this to our advantage, this naming convention. So two options you've got your rename and you've got your rename shot. Both of these are containing this whole tokenized system that you can use to make things quite easy and to bulk rename in the timeline.